Hey everybody, welcome back to Project Happy Home. For those of you who are new here, welcome. I'm Tanya, doctor, lawyer, turned homeschooling mom of 3 kids ages 8, 5, and 3. I am going to be using The Good and the Beautiful's language arts for each of my children next year, one of whom will be a rising pre-kindergartner, a senior kindergartner / first grader, and a 3rd grader. Of course, being an eclectic homeschooler, I'm going to be using a variety of resources, not just The Good and the Beautiful for language arts, but I wanted to do an unboxing and first impressions video for my secular viewers in particular who might be lured by The Good and the Beautiful because it is so very attractive. It's a very visually stunning curricula. It's also very minimal. It appeals to those of us who have many different materials and we want to kind of streamline it into one thing. That being said, The Good and the Beautiful is developed by Jenny Phillips, who I believe is a Mormon. Though the curricula itself is non-denominational, it does preserve a definite Christian emphasis. And I wanted to go through and flag everywhere I could anything that referred to religion or Jesus Christ or God or anything that might be objectionable to a secular homeschooler. Now, I understand that the secular homeschooling world spans the gamut from people who are very religious and maybe Christian, but prefer to keep religion entirely out of their academics, all the way to people who believe in God, who perhaps are not Christian, and are fine with a lot of the moral teachings and things like that, but would prefer the word to be used to be God rather than Christ, etc. And then there's the people who may not believe in God at all and definitely do not want any reference to that in their curricula. So, as we all know, being homeschoolers, we have a lot of Christian resources, and some of them are really quite good. And it can be sad for a secular homeschooler to not use something that is very well put together simply because of the mentions of religion. So, I went through and I flagged everywhere that I could find on my first pass through that referred to God and Christ and anything that might be objectionable. Understanding, please, that these levels of tolerance for mentions of religion are different in each of us. So please don't comment below if you think that, this is just totally not acceptable for a secular homeschooler. It will not be for some of us and it will be for others. So if you're interested, stay tuned and watch the rest of the video. And if you're not, please refrain from any unpleasant comments. If I have forgotten to flag anything or if there's anything I forget to mention, I'm just human, so please feel free to add that in the comments down below. So as I mentioned, I'm using it for each of my 3 children. The level primer K for my youngest, level 1 for my middle child, and level 3 for my eldest. So this video will be my initial impressions and secular flagging of level 1. The curriculum comes with a set of little readers. I believe there is 15 of them, and they're just actually one sheet that you cut apart and you just assemble yourself. I haven't yet stapled them together, but we'll go through these later. A level 1 reader, which is quite thick as you can see. A level 1 course book, which is also nice and chunky. And a set of Phonics cards. The Phonics cards are printed on like a thicker cardstock type of paper, and I haven't cut them apart yet, but I will show you them as well. I'll start with the level 1 course book. As you can see, I have flagged it extensively. There are quite a few references to God and Jesus Christ in the level 1 course book. That being said, I didn't see that much that I couldn't alter with the greatest of ease. So the curricula starts off and there's a daily checklist of basically what kinds of things you want to go through with your child. Here it says you have your child read The Good and the Beautiful level 1 reader aloud for at least 10 minutes on his or her own. Practice spelling words for 5 to 10 minutes, practice phonics cards for 5, sight word ladders for 5, and complete 30 to 40 minutes in the course workbook, and then work on poetry memorization 1 or 2 times a week. The structure of this is really easily doable and lovely. There's a table of contents that goes through all the different lessons and what you'll be going through in them. The initial section talks about what the course is about, how levels pre-K through 3 focus heavily on phonics and reading and require one-on-one time, but then levels 4 and up are designed to be self-directed by the student. It says very clearly, does the curriculum include doctrine specific to any Christian denomination? No. The goal of the Good and the Beautiful curriculum is not to teach doctrine specific to a particular Christian sect, but to teach general principles of moral character such as honesty and kindness. And the King James Version of the Bible is used whenever they quote Bible verses. The reader, which is 312 pages, contains stories that support family, God, nature, and high character. And I will show you exactly how they reference that there. There is a feature of The Good and the Beautiful which I actually disagree with. Now, it is a Charlotte Mason tenet that they must grow up on the best. They must never be a period in their lives when they are allowed to read or listen to twaddle or reading made easy. I actually disagree with this concept of avoiding twaddle entirely. Yes, we have a limited amount of time in our lives to read. Yes, you should provide quality literature to your children, but I think that I myself am a voracious reader and have read everything from classics to romances to metaphysical books to, physical chemistry and pathology books, and I gain a lot from all of them. Sometimes reading light fiction, what we would call light fiction for an adult, is fun, and it encourages your enjoyment of books and the act of reading, and I really want my children to enjoy reading. So whatever they choose to read in their free time is really up to them, and I try very hard not to limit their reading unless I find bad character traits or poor morals being taught. But I think that there's a lot of fun reading for children that is not of high moral value, that encourages them to read on their own and develop their imaginations and just fosters their love of independent reading. So that little blurb on twaddle aside. No other preparation time is required for the entire course other than creating your phonics cards and your little readers. So that's really nice. One thing to point out is that you can buy The Good and the Beautiful book list available on jennyphillips.com. And that, I believe, is $5 for the PDF download. It includes over 300 of Jenny Phillips's top recommended wholesome books. So you will not find any twaddle on that list. If you want to create a literature curriculum or a read it loud curriculum or reader list for your child that definitely doesn't include twaddle, that's a really good option. I looked at it. It is very detailed and specific. There's a description of each and every book. You can see a sample of the PDF online, and I'll provide the link down in the description box below. As far as twaddle goes in our house, I do not read twaddle to my children, but if they want to read it themselves, I'm totally okay with that. If you want to create a nighttime book list for you guys to read aloud to your children or a morning basket list, this is a really nice resource, I think. They tell you how to organize the phonics cards into 3 different bags: learning, mastered, and not learned, and you basically shift them as you work through the cards. It goes through sight word lists right here, and in the sight word lists you can see here God is a sight word and so is Christ. I'm really totally okay with stuff like this because I feel like you need to know how to read words about religion. Personally, I find theology incredibly fascinating, so reading words like faith in the spelling list really doesn't bother me. And again, Christ is in the spelling list as well. There are some poems that include mention of God. So here, Sounds, written by Jenny Phillips, says, I thank thee, Lord, for making ears and all the lovely things I hear. Again, if a poem is objectionable to you, I think it's easy enough to avoid. In the poetry memorization section, they provide 10 different poems for the child to memorize, though the actual lesson book says that you can choose 3 for them to have memorized by the end of the year. I'll go through a couple of the lessons so you can see the flow, and then I will return to talking about some of the areas I've flagged that might be of concern to a secular homeschooler. So lesson 1 begins, and you have vowels and consonants, short and long vowels. It does a little review of the alphabet and then goes on to reading, talking about long and short vowels, reviewing those types of vocab words about grammar. In blue, it provides instructions to the adult, and then it says a script in black. So here it says read to the child, and then the parent will read all the text in black. Every word has to have at least 1 vowel, etc. I really like that they provide check boxes along the sides so that you can check off what you have done. Lesson 2 goes on and is about phonogram previews. So the oo sound, so zoo, roof, food, tool, and it has all of these words listed out in these horses, and then sentences for the child to read at the bottom. Lesson 3 is another phonogram review. Lesson 4 is about poetry. It provides some poems that you read aloud to the child and then some questions to discuss the poem with the child afterwards. At the base of this lesson in blue, there is a section that says, if desired, research bird nests with the child. And then later it says, use this as an opportunity to explore with the child and also to help her gain an inquisitive mind and appreciation for God's marvelous creations. So this type of reference in the adult text is found scattered throughout this book. And that is something to be aware of. So this isn't something your child necessarily needs to read, and it's really easy to take a Sharpie to it if you have a serious objection to the mention of God. In our household, we don't at all, so that's perfectly fine with me. More phonogram previews for lesson 5. Here's a sentence that some people might find objectionable. Number 5 is Dad leads our family in prayer. If I left the sentence, I might actually take out the sentence, but if I leave it, what I will say is Dad and Mom lead our family in prayer. Or even change it to one of the children's names so that they have a place in that leading. I think that has more to do with your own family values than it does with your religious beliefs. And you could even change it to in thanks if you want. Dad leads our family in thanks. Dad leads our family to the beach. You know, it's a fairly simple thing to change if you have an objection to it. So I'm just going to flip through some of these pages so that you can see how it goes. There are areas in the book where you have fill in here, so you're practicing the differences between am, is, and are. Here's lesson 11 with poetry again, and they have an actual section for my prayer here. So, dearest Lord, I kneel down and pray. And then you can end with any of these rhyming words. Play, today, away, way, say, or stay. Again, this is as simple as crossing out this section if you have an objection, or altering it to fit for you. One of the most beautiful things about The Good and the Beautiful, and one of the things that drew me to it so strongly, was their incorporation of art study into the curriculum. It is woven very seamlessly throughout the different lessons. So you'll notice this lesson is not technically an art study. It's about the double E, but so for sweet or cheeks or teeth, words like that. But they have this beautiful painting in there. It talks about the painting a little bit, gives you a little background, and it's just a lovely way to incorporate art study in your regular language arts curriculum. That being said, after having gone through the course book for level 1 and for level 3, I think the art pages are some of the most objectionable to a secular homeschooler, precisely because they mention God in almost every one of these descriptions. At some point, it always says something to the extent of God gave this artist, Hans Dahl, a talent for painting, etc., etc. Or God gave us this beautiful landscape, or he painted God's sky, etc. So really, this boils down to preference, like I said, and tolerance for inclusion of God in curricular materials, in academic curricula. If you are okay with this, great. I'm actually okay with this. If you're not, it might be something to be aware of, just to black out with a Sharpie or to avoid reading out loud to your child. It's really up to you whether this would bother you a lot or not. I will say that they reference God on almost every page that includes a piece of art. At the bottom of this page, you have sentences to read, and they're just basically imaginative sentences about the painting. So the girl seems so sweet. She is going to feed 3 sheep. I really love this idea of incorporating grammar and art together. So I'm okay with the brief mention of God. I'm just going to flip through until I come to something else so that you can get an idea of how it goes through. Here's common and proper nouns, some stories, another art study. Really beautiful full page color art studies, consonant blends, a reading assessment. So there's reading assessments in the appendix here. So here in the back you have an appendix with charts and assessments, and you'll have basically you can record it here where the beginning date is, how long it took, and how many incorrect words they have. You can read section A, section B, so on and so forth. It'll be a really nice way for you to track the child's reading progress. I really like that feature. I like how it's interspersed straight through. So right here, it's just assessment A, so you'll be reading section A. And if your child isn't doing that well, it might be a good signal for you to slow down, review those lessons before moving forward. I like how each of the pages is a little bit different. I like how they incorporate a little bit of history about classic tales, like the tale of Peter Rabbit and Beatrix Potter in there. And as you go through, you just have it again. Here's a lesson on artwork, and you'll see here, art helps you see and feel how wondrous and lovely the world around you is that God made. Again, totally fine in our household, but in a house that is a little bit more strict about keeping their academic material secular, that can be a problem. Here you have Lord right here in the word chart. That's why I flagged it. On this page, you have a question about how big was the ark. Again, I don't have a problem with this because I think people should be able to read words, whether or not they have something to do with religion. Here, God gave us nature and animals to help us with our needs, to build houses and to have things such as water and eggs, etc. Why did God make these things? This page was actually a little bit heavy, and God keeps referencing it. If God made nature and animals to bring us joy, what happens when we study and notice nature? I think that how you present the material, again, really depends on your own moral structure at home, your own beliefs about whether or not the mention of God is appropriate in language arts curricula. So far, though, everything I've seen is really easy to tweak, in my opinion. Here's a word in the word list, minister. Again, you should be able to read these words. Oh, here you have in the story, the short story with the sound, she wears her skirt to church and brings her fur purse. Again, I think that I'm really okay with mentions of words that include religious subjects like churches and ministers and pastors and Christ and prayer. If you're not, however, this might not be the appropriate curriculum for you because it can get a little tedious to keep adjusting things. I like how when they have reading reviews, it's really beautiful still. Like here you can see this rainbow of colors in this page for text, and it's a lovely feature, especially at this price point, which I should mention, the level 1 course set printed out and fully ready to go for you is $58. Here's another Dad leads our family in prayer. You know what? I might actually leave the first father and change this one to mom just to make it fair, because if I have any objection to that, it's that mom can also lead our family in prayer. Here you have praying as one of the words for ing. Again, not objectionable to me. Living, liking, playing, praying. Right here you have played, prayed, stayed. There's words like blessed. These are words in the English language, so I do not have a problem with them, but I wanted to flag them in case they're objectionable to any of you. Here's another art page, and this little passage here is probably the most objectionable passage thus far in this book for me, and this is on page 112. It basically says, we all have our own style. As long as our style is Christ-like, it is wonderful to be different and unique. It creates variety and beauty in the world. I understand the point of what they're saying, and certainly Christ is a figure to be admired for all that he valued and taught to his followers. That being said, if you are not Christian, it is a very exclusionary statement in many ways. I think it's easy enough to tweak by saying as long as our style is, and then you can list some of the better qualities of Christ. So what do we mean when we say Christ-like? Some of the aspirational characteristics of Christ, perhaps, as a wonderful role model, etc. I think using vocab like Christ-like can be alienating to the average secular homeschooler. So just be aware that words like that are coming so that you can preview the lessons and perhaps not stumble over what you want to say when you're describing this to your child. Adjectives that describe Christ. So this is an entire page that I think might be a little bit harder to tweak. So this page we might actually take out simply because we're not Christian. So my children would find this relatively hard to do. One way that you could alter this, especially if you're not Christian, is to replace the word Christ with someone in your religion or in your culture that your children are familiar with and is a role model for them to emulate. Another way to do it is to change it to someone that they love, someone that is a lovely person that is full of good values, and so that the activity could still be meaningful and they can understand how to sort adjectives. So it is something to do. Another thing that you could do if you are not Christian is to actually tell your children about who Christ is and what he means to Christians, and describe him in a non-religious way, but rather in a more theological or secular or humanistic way. And then you can use the activity without altering it at all. You'll see there are some poems here. For example, why it was God, my child, the mighty one, he formed all that we see. This is the poem called Who Made the Stars? So again, if you have an objection to a poem, I think you can skip it without really losing the worth in the curriculum. Now we have a huge stretch of days where I did not see very much that was objectionable to me. Again, I'm only human, so I definitely might have missed some things, so please forgive me if I did. I just want to give you a gist of how much tweaking is required in this curriculum. Right here, there are 4 types of sentences in lesson 48, and you have here, art is a wonderful gift from God. It can draw us closer to God, it can make us smile and make us appreciate the good things in the world. Things like this, if you have an objection to, it's easy enough to just exit out for yourself and not read it. It really doesn't take away from the art study. There's some decoding activities, there's some patterns. I like how they provide some games in there for the children so that you can play with them. The reading selection here is The Hero of Harlem, and here it says, in this book the author gives many lessons about being like Christ. Obviously there is an opportunity to discuss many great qualities in this story, and they use it to describe how the boy is Christ-like in his choices in the story. You can read the story obviously and not talk about that, or just talk about the good values as I mentioned before. Here there's a question, is the Bible fiction or non-fiction? The Bible is non-fiction. It tells stories that really happened. However, Jesus also told some fictional stories, parables, to teach lessons. Now again, this is really dependent on your individual beliefs, and if you have an objection to it, go ahead and skip that. That's in lesson 58. Or use it as an opportunity to discuss. I really like using some of the statements that our family doesn't believe in as opportunities for discussion so that we can talk about respecting everyone's beliefs, etc. Lesson 61 is about parables. So again, if you want to keep this secular, this is probably not going to work for you. If you want to discuss Christianity in a more theological way without bringing into your own family's beliefs, this might work for you. It's really up to you entirely. Every single part of this is about Jesus Christ and God. So again, you might want to skip lesson 61 or include it in a more secular humanistic way. Here you have lesson 62. Christ is the center of their lives. They're talking about 2 brothers. If you want to take out that sentence, it's really simple. You just X out that sentence and you still talk about how they are gentle and notices when people need help and how the other brother is nice and merciful. So I do think the book does a good job of telling stories that illustrate good morals, and if you want to take out any reference to Christianity in particular, I don't think it's that difficult. I have here a poem in lesson 73 and it says, the wonderful artist is God above. Again, if you have a problem with that, you can take it out. Here there's a sentence, we blank about Jesus, and it's read or read. So you just have to put in the right word. Easy enough to change that word or to take out that sentence entirely. I wouldn't do either. I think that you do read about Jesus. You don't read about Jesus, and that sentence itself doesn't impart any particular religious leaning to my child. Here is the reading challenge. Here it talks about these kinds of books are not good for us to read. Family is very important to God. God wants us to be kind and loving, etc. This is lesson 74, and it's talking about twaddle again and quality books like Little Bear, etc. Really quite beautiful. I mean, the book itself is so lovely to flip through that you can understand why a secular homeschooler would want to use it. I like how it goes through with different types of activities. It's really not overwhelming at all. If you have a child that doesn't like to write too much in a grammar lesson or a language arts lesson, I think this book does a really good job of keeping it manageable. Here you have in lesson 79, a butterfly landed softly on my arm to, I believe this is, you have to edit the story. I was grateful for the beautiful things God created. So again, if you have sentences to fix, oh, that's funny. So if you have things to edit because you feel that a sentence like that should not be included, it's easy enough to edit. Down here it has the actual answers for you, so it's very easy that way. Here in lesson 82, they talk about a book that you can get as a supplement to the curriculum called Christian Liberty Nature Reader. Again, this is a pretty easy book to replace with a secular one. so not anything that bothered me. In lesson 86, it says, "Why doesn't God help me? I wondered, and he answered, you didn't ask." Why didn't God show me? This is very much about God, so if you want to avoid that, lesson 86 would be one to avoid and perhaps replace with another poem. Here in lesson 89, there is a review game here, and it starts off and it says, "There are many pathways to choose in this world. God's word helps us to choose the right pathway to follow. His pathway always leads to happiness." And here it talks about you're supposed to find the right pathway by following the prepositions, which is cute. You can play this game without ever reading this section if you have an objection to anything I just read. And that was all I flagged in the course book, actually. I may have missed one or two things, but I think I caught most of them, so I hope you get an idea of just about how much tweaking there is to do. The book is quite large, right? It's about 300 pages. I think the amount of tweaking I have to do to make this completely secular for my child, or secular enough to fit with our family's morals, is very minimal. And I'm really excited to use it with my rising first grader. She'll be like senior kindergarten first next year. So I think it's a really usable curriculum, even if you are a secular homeschooler. If you don't want to tweak anything, I would suggest that you stay away from it. If you don't mind this level of tweaking, I think it's great. So here is the level 1 reader. I've tweaked everything I could see. As you can see, there is much less tweaking to be done in the reader than I expected. I was a little concerned initially that the reader would be full of stories referencing God and Christ, but it's not. Here, it simply references church in the story. Here, a friend is a blessing. So, you'll have to explain what a blessing is. That being said, a blessing doesn't necessarily have to have a religious connotation. In this story, it says Anne wakes up, says her prayers, get stressed. So it illustrates a type of lifestyle that your family might not have if you're secular. Here it says, when the sun had gone down, they sat in the yard and looked at the stars. There are a ton of stars, said Kate. God made all of those big stars, said Grandpa. So things like this you might want to avoid if you do not believe that. Here, I don't know what to do, says Seth. Let's pray, said Ted. So again, in this story, Lost in the Snow, you might want to tweak it or just avoid that story for your child. And then here it continues, God help me think of a plan. This story of all of them I thought had the most references to God and sort of God being essential in your safety. Here it says, I'm glad God made you small. I am small for my age too. Again, easy sentences to either remove from your story, just redact from your story, or to avoid the story entirely. Here's another story. Mom teaches me that God made camels with feet that can walk well in the sand. How neat. I think you can read this entire story and just avoid that sentence if you wanted to. And then here, he teaches them about God who made all those things. Here you have, he thanks God for the woods and the lake. He thanks God for the birds and the flowers. He thanks God for his family and their chance to go camping. Again, this is just one page about praying. If you have an objection to a story about praying, redact that page. The story still works. It's all about camping and what you do when you're camping. Here you have Penny's pine trees. There's several stories in here that don't have any reference to God at all. So to give you an idea, I flagged 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 flags in this story, and there are several stories in this almost 300-page reader. This is the collection of 15 tiny readers that you're going to make yourself. Basically, each one showed up as a page that I had to cut in half, and then really simple and easy. It took me about 5 minutes to make them. I didn't really find very much that was objectionable in them at all, except for 2 readers. Here you have What Makes Us Happy. It talks about every person wants to be happy. God's words tell us how to be happy, etc. And it talks about Sally and Tommy are grateful for all the wonderful things God has given them. Every day they see how pretty the land is that God made, etc. So there's that story, and then there's also a whole world to explore. Again, I just flipped through these quickly, so I might have missed one, but in general, most of these readers are secular. This one says, God made children to run and hike and work and play and explore the wonderful world he made. And it talks about basically how God made everything and how God wants us to use our time wisely. God gave us the whole world to explore, etc. God yeah, and it keeps saying that sentence, God gave you the whole world to explore. Again, you can alter it for your own religious beliefs or your own secular humanist beliefs, or you can avoid that reader entirely. The phonics cards that come basically have 164 cards in the set, and for those of you who use All About Reading or All About Spelling, they are very similar to those cards. They're printed on similar weight cardstock. They are double-sided, if you can see, and you just have to cut them apart. I like that they're numbered, so it's easy to keep them in order. And then there are some cards with many words on them, so you have a little less bulk, which I thought was a nice feature. And there's really not that much to show here, except for the fact that the words do get progressively more complicated as you go along. So as an overall review, as a secular homeschooler, I think this is a great curriculum to try out. This entire set costs $58, which I think is incredible value for such a hefty reader and course book, extra reader cards and phonics cards. I think the value of this curriculum cannot be beat, honestly. I really appreciate how colorful and beautiful the curriculum is. There is something to be said for just having beautiful materials to use with your child. I love how the text changes in color. I love how they incorporate art study into the language arts. As a secular homeschooler who believes in God, this is very easy for me to use and requires very little tweaking. If you are, however, a secular homeschooler who prefers to have zero reference to religion or God in your materials, this is harder to use simply because of the level of tweaking, as you can see from the amount of flags I have. I hope this video was helpful to you to sort of gauge whether it's appropriate for you as a secular homeschooler. If you guys are using The Good and the Beautiful or have used The Good and the Beautiful as a secular homeschooler or as a Christian one, I would love to hear your experiences down below in the comments. If you're supplementing it with other things, let me know what you're supplementing it with. I will be doing a video later talking about the supplementary materials we're using throughout the year. Anyway, you guys, I hope this was helpful. I'm sorry it was long. I wanted to be as complete as possible and as helpful as possible to secular homeschoolers who've been eyeing The Good and the Beautiful. Stay tuned for the level 3 unboxing and first impressions and sort of secular overview as well. Thanks so much for watching as always, and I wish you the very best day.